Montreal's REM is an amazing rapid transit project that is improving the commutes of thousands of people around the city and the metro area. But we should not stop progress here. More rapid transit projects need to get built in parallel or in the very near future. I've made a video about one of these projects that was unfortunately cancelled, the REM de l'Est. Today we'll talk about another of these projects and what could be done in the future. The project aimed to build a rapid transit line entirely on the south shore of Montreal. To understand why this is necessary, we need to take a look at what the area looks like today. The South Shore is a huge and populous part of the Montreal metropolitan region. It is home to around 500 to 700,000 people, depending on how far you stretch the definition of shore. Ironically, most of the South Shore is east of Montreal, but anyway. There is some rapid transit over there. One metro station on the Yellow Line in Longueuil, 3 REM stations along Highway 10 in Brossard, and commuter rail lines 13 and 14, which are as frequent as solar eclipses. So yes, they're fast when they exist, but they have huge problems. I've made a whole video about that. You can watch it later, after this one of course. So when you look at all these rapid and mass transit lines, the problem becomes obvious. Huge populous parts of the South Shore have no nearby rapid transit at all. You either need to get to Longueuil metro station somehow, which luckily has a massive bus terminal serving almost everywhere in that region. If you live further south, you can take a bus to the REM in Brossard, and if you live in places like Châteauguay, buses take you directly to a Montreal metro station. But when that many people rely on them every day, and when they get stuck in the same traffic as cars, it's time to think about replacing them by something more reliable, faster, and frequent. And it's not only about building rapid transit to bring people to Montreal, it's also about people in the South Shore going to other places on the South Shore, basically suburb to suburb travel, which actually represents a lot of the daily trips that people make. For example, the Autoroute 30 and Route 132 on the South Shore are almost always full, because as you can see, there is no rapid transit line dedicated to connecting the South Shore together. The few stations that exist are all aiming at bringing people to downtown Montreal, except for the 3 REM stations in Brossard. Yes, the commuter trains have many stations in cities on the South Shore, but nobody uses the commuter trains for anything except commuting to downtown Montreal, because the trains are so infrequent and the stations are literally in the middle of nowhere. Now that we understand a bit more about the area, we have to think about where to put the line and what should it be? A tram, a train, something similar to the REM? A perfect corridor for such a line is the Blvd Taschereau. It starts near to the Longueuil metro station we talked about. It goes all the way to the Panama station on the REM. After that, it goes all the way to the city of La Prairie. There is dozens of bus lines that run along this boulevard or in the neighborhoods around it, either to feed the metro or the REM or connecting to other busy destinations on the South Shore. However, there is not much housing around the Blvd Taschereau, but there is a hospital, an enormous amount of commercial spaces, shopping centers, restaurants, etc. And unfortunately, endless parking lots for the people to directly go from their homes to all of these places. The boulevard is 6 to 8 lanes wide in some places with a high speed limit. It's basically a giant car sewer and not a very fun place to be at if you're not inside of a vehicle. So if such a place is very ugly and unpleasant and full of traffic and very busy, then it is a perfect candidate for a major redesign of that area. And that is why the South Shore REM or REM Taschereau was proposed. But first you might wonder why every project in the Montreal metro area seems to be a new REM project. Why not extend the metro instead, or the commuter rail, or build something entirely new like a tram? This is actually fair criticism that I tend to agree with. We'll talk about it a bit later. To see why it would be beneficial to build other projects similar to the REM, we have to look at the original REM project. Most of you know about it. It is an automated metro, mostly outdoors but also with some underground sections. It goes from the South Shore to downtown Montreal and then towards the West and North Shore. Therefore, it's kind of a light metro due to its low capacity, dedicated right-of-way and high frequency, but it's mixed with a commuter train service since it crosses the metropolitan area from one side to the other, thus covering large distances. And more importantly, it was surprisingly affordable. Even with all the cost overruns, the entire project only summed up to $9.4 billion for 67 kilometers of fully automated rapid transit. That is insanely cheap by North American standards. But the cost was also this low because basically all the stars were aligned for this project. They reused an old commuter rail line, including a tunnel. They built along a highway median and on an existing bridge. The trains mostly run at grade or elevated, elevated, which is way cheaper than digging tunnels. So a fair criticism is that not all of the future REM projects will have the same luck and the same situation. But even the REM de l'Est project, which wouldn't have used much existing dedicated right-of-way and was also way more complex with 8 underground stations, it still had a relatively low estimated cost of $10 billion. Therefore, it does seem that CDPQ Infra is good at building those types of light, automated, elevated metros. And we know very well that with expertise, the more rapid transit we build, the easier it becomes to build more in the future, in less time and at a lower cost. So with this logic, why not build more? And thus, with that momentum of starting building the REM in 2018 and the REM de l'Est being proposed in 2020, the REM 2.0 in the South Shore was proposed. It was way less detailed and concrete than the REM de l'Est project that was cancelled, because it didn't seem to have gone much further than the brainstorming phase. But still, let's take a deeper look into it and what could be done in the future. The project envisioned a rapid transit line running along the Boulevard Taschereau that we talked about earlier. It would have started in La Prairie and gone all the way to the Longueuil metro station, thus connecting on the way to the Panama REM station, and then it would continue north to the city of Boucherville. The idea was to build elevated tracks along the Boulevard Taschereau, similar to the original REM, but then transition the tracks to ground level in the historic center of Longueuil to avoid visual impacts in the only actually nice part of the city. So I kind of understand why they want to preserve it. Beyond Longueuil, CDPQ Infra never really developed a plan, but the most logical alignment would have continued along Boulevard Roland-Terrien, which is very large and has a bunch of space to build a rapid transit line, and it's also one of the main boulevards in Longueuil, so it makes sense to put it there to get as much ridership as possible. This area also has a hospital, major commercial areas, a college, schools, and also apartment buildings, and it kind of divides populous neighborhoods of the city. Another great corridor in Longueuil is the Chemin Chambly, which also needs a lot of work today because this street is filled with potholes. In my opinion, Chemin Chambly makes more sense because it's really more in the center of Longueuil. It's a very dense part of the city with a lot of housing, a lot of restaurants. Then the line could have turned north to continue along Boulevard Jacques Cartier to Boucherville with a good mix between elevated and at-grade segments. Again, there's some low-density neighborhoods, a huge industrial area, commercial buildings, and also a golf. As a golf enthusiast myself, I would love to be able to take public transit to go play golf. Then the Boulevard Jacques Cartier turns into the Boulevard de Mortagne in Boucherville. It goes right through the middle of the city, so it's just perfect to have it serve as many people as possible. This project was a pretty good idea. It would have been the first rapid transit line to truly link many areas of the South Shore together. One major problem with transit in North America is low housing density. Neighborhoods are full of single-family homes spaced too far apart. So if rapid transit lines are too far apart from these neighborhoods, that means buses have to travel long distances, looping around low-density areas, which means these buses cannot be frequent. Often the schedules are like 30 minutes at peak and 60 minutes off peak. You could tell, well, you could just simply run more buses, but the problem is that it would cost simply too much money to run buses to have a good frequency. If the buses have to carry large distances, it means that you need more buses to run frequent service along the line. But if rapid transit was more extensive, it means more people would be closer to rapid transit lines, and thus the bus lines to feed the rapid transit lines could be shorter. And with shorter lines, it is easier to run frequent buses because the lines are shorter. You can, for example, have only 4 buses and run frequently around the city. So let's do the math to sum up this logic. More rapid transit means less distance for people to get to the rapid transit stations, which means it is easier to run frequent buses to get people directly from their homes to the rapid or mass transit stations. And with housing and commercial development around rapid transit stations, it means that more people will be able to cycle or even walk to the stations. All of this means that it becomes more practical and useful to take public transit, even as much as driving in some cases, which means that less people will take their cars in favor of public transit, which finally means that we have more reasons to develop even more the rapid transit. So it's basically a positive feedback loop. You make more trips possible by bringing more frequent and fast public transit closer to people. Driving is very practical because you can just take your car at home and go directly to your destination at any time you want. And we should have the same approach for public transit. It should be as convenient as driving, and even more actually. But to achieve this, you need 3 things. It needs to be fast, frequent, and go to all the places you need to go. If these 3 criteria are met, that, then why would someone choose to drive instead of taking public transit? Okay, just a quick note about what I just said. You'll tell me that some people absolutely need their cars on their daily lives. Maybe because they work in construction and need to carry heavy tools every day, or maybe because their schedule does not fit the schedule of public transit, like working at nights, for example. But two important things here. First, these people are a very small percentage of the population, so most of the people would benefit from alternatives such as taking public transit. And second thing, there's a difference between promoting public transit and prohibiting driving. Promoting public transit is more about giving better alternatives rather than banning driving. You can still drive if you want, the roads are still gonna be there. But people that don't necessarily need to drive but are rather forced to drive because there is no other option will now have the choice to drive or take public transit if they want. But if there's no public transit available, then everyone is forced to drive, which is not good. However, this public transit needs to be good if you want people to use it. And that's what we were talking about in this video. And let's come back to the me of the past talking about this. And in public transit, you don't get stuck in traffic. You can sleep or read a book or watch a movie or work or whatever. You don't need to worry about parking. And most importantly, you don't need to spend thousands of dollars per year in car ownership. That's another reason why public transit should be frequent and well connected together. Because if, for example, you have a rapid transit line, but you have no good way to get there easily by public transit itself, then that means most people will need a car to go to the train station. That's something that happens a lot in commuter rail networks in North America, which is not good because it cancels out a big upside of taking public transit instead of driving. You save tons of money that you would otherwise spend for your car. And not all drivers are car enthusiasts, so not everyone is happy to spend thousands of dollars for a car. Therefore, if you need to have a car to take public transit, then you're basically paying for both. So that's why improving public transit on the South Shore is crucial. We need better rapid transit, better mass transit. We need better bus lines to act as feeder for these lines and to cover the less dense and remote places where rapid transit would not make sense. In Switzerland, for example, yes, the cities are very dense places where everyone is relatively close to a rapid transit station. But there's also some people that live in very remote villages. But believe it or not, even small villages of less than 1,000 people have frequent buses that run around villages and bring residents to the train stations. But why is it possible to run such frequent buses even though the population is small? Well, first because the villages aren't really that far from train stations, so it is easy to make buses link quickly and frequently the villages and train stations. And the trains themselves are very frequent and very practical since they go pretty much to every small to medium city in Switzerland. You'll tell me, yeah, but North America and Europe are not comparable. And yes, this is true, but the example I just mentioned is in a remote place in Switzerland and with a low population density, so pretty much very similar to suburban places in North America. But all of this is possible because they have a very extensive network. We actually can do this here on the South Shore. We just need to expand the rapid transit on the most busy parts of the cities so that as many people as possible are relatively close to rapid and mass transit stations. So we come back to the same conclusion as before. The more frequent and closer mass transit is, and the more people will use it, and thus eliminating the need to have a car for millions of people. Even though the South Shore REM project was cancelled, we should really think about developing the public transit in that area in the very near future. And not necessarily with a new REM line, we can think about other modes of transportation. The original REM project is great, and I've said a lot of good things about it and CDPQ Infra in my videos. But they definitely have their flaws, and building new REM lines everywhere isn't necessarily the best option. For example, the original REM on the South Shore has cut many bus lines going to downtown Montreal, which sucks because it removed a lot of public transit offer on the South Shore. This is because the CDPQ is being paid depending on the passengers and how many kilometers they travel. So it's very beneficial for them to have people converge to the REM. And this is not good. Even though I personally prefer taking the REM or trains over buses, I understand that for some people it's better to take a bus that takes you directly to your destination. And that's why new public transit should be in complement of what already exists. And yes, it's true that some some lines were a bit redundant to the REM, but they should have made better use of those buses to really bring frequent and practical bus service to get people directly from their homes to the REM. Another downside specifically for this South Shore REM project is that CDPQ Infra was not very communicative with the mayors of Longueuil and Brossard, which sucks because these two cities really seemed in favor of building a new REM line on the South Shore. But in this case, it's a bit more understanding, because at this time the CDPQ was already working on the original REM, they were in the planning phase of the REM de l'Est, and now they're also part of the Canada High-Speed Rail project and also the Quebec Tramway. They cannot work on everything at once, so that's why we cannot only rely on them to build a new rapid transit in Quebec. A positive thing is that the cities of Longueuil and Brossard acknowledge that the South Shore needs better transit, and they also agree that the Boulevard Taschereau is an insult to good urbanism. Therefore, last year, after not hearing any more from the CDPQ about the REM project, they decided to propose their own new project, $500 million to redo the entire Boulevard Taschereau, with things such as better spaces for pedestrians and bike lanes, more greenery, about 30,000 new housing units, and possibly a BRT or a tram line. I'm not a fan of BRTs, but I think the tram can be a good idea. I have usually been opposed to trams, especially in suburban places like that. But since there is a lot of things to improve on that corridor, and since they have plans to improve it, such as building new dense housing, building commercial places, and building pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, I think that all of these plus a tram line can really make this whole area a city by itself. You'd have access to everything easily, and you'd have an easy access to the REM or the metro to go to Montreal. And you could also go to other places on the South Shore along this corridor. Even though this is a good start, I think the South Shore needs more projects like this. We've mentioned this tram or REM line that goes from La Prairie to Boucherville, but there could also be a local line focused mainly on Longueuil, from the metro up to the new passenger terminal of the Saint-Hubert airport, for example. This will be Montreal's new secondary airport, so it would be great if good transit is built up there. The line could be along the Chemin Chambly we mentioned earlier. There could be a branch to the airport and another one that continues to the Saint-Hubert borough of Longueuil, with a transfer station with the line 13 of the commuter train. While we talk about commuter trains, there could actually be a new train line that could actually become a branch of the line 13 we just talked about. It would go along the current rail corridor next to the Boulevard Kimber in Saint-Hubert and then continue along this rail right-of-way. So there could be a couple of stops in Saint-Hubert and Brossard, including a station connecting to the REM, and then it could continue to La Prairie and go all the way to the line 14 commuter train line. Now let's take an overall look of those few ideas we talked about, and including the existing lines, you can see we're starting to have a pretty decent network on the South Shore. So many people would be living way closer to rapid or mass transit stations, and thus more people would use it since it would become very practical to do a multitude of trips. Those are a few ideas and not very detailed. If you've got some ideas about lines that we could make on the South Shore, let me know in the comments and maybe I will talk about them in the future video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. If you want to support the channel, you can become a member of this channel or you can subscribe to my Patreon. Both are in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching and see you on the next one.